After a consultation at the clinic, a pregnant woman accidentally ran into her husband with his mistress in the hallway, and what she heard made her blood run cold. Alice sat on the soft examination table in the ultrasound room, trying to suppress her anxiety. Her fingers nervously smoothed the fabric of her light-colored cardigan. Her gaze wandered around the sterile room, filled with the steady hum of medical equipment. Beside her stood Dr. Linda Evans, a calm woman in her 40s, with a short blonde bob and a kind smile. Her white lab coat was impeccably pressed, radiating experience and professionalism. "All right, Mom, let's take a look at your little one," the doctor said gently, applying the ultrasound wand to Alice's rounded belly. "Just relax, don't worry." Alice offered a weak smile and nodded. A blurry image appeared on the monitor. For the first few seconds, she couldn't make out anything at all, just spots, lines, and incomprehensible shapes. "Look right here." Dr. Evans's voice was as steady as her movements. "See? That's the head. And here's a little hand." Alice squinted, trying to decipher the image, and suddenly, amid the black and white chaos, she saw a tiny, distinct shape. Her heart skipped a beat. "That's my baby," she thought. Everything inside her filled with warmth, and tears of joy pricked her eyes. "Is it really?" she whispered, afraid to ruin the moment. "Is it a boy or a girl?" Dr. Evans laughed, carefully moving the wand. "It's a bit too early to tell the gender with certainty. We'll leave that as a surprise for next time. The most important thing is that the baby is growing and everything looks perfectly healthy." "Right, that's the most important thing," Alice repeated softly, unable to take her eyes off the screen. A wave of tenderness washed over her chest. So warm it felt like it could fill the entire room. The doctor removed the wand and handed Alice some paper towels to wipe the gel off her stomach. Then she peeled off her gloves and turned to the young woman. "Everything looks great," she said with a confident smile. "Congratulations, Alice. Now your main job is to take care of yourself and the baby. No stress." Alice nodded, but a shadow of doubt flickered in her eyes. She couldn't help but think about the fact that her husband, Daniel, hadn't even found the time to be by her side for this major milestone. "Thank you, doctor," she managed to say, trying to keep her smile from faltering. "Everything will be fine, doctor," Evans added gently, noticing her distress. "You have the happiest moments ahead of you." Alice shook the doctor's hand with gratitude and headed for the door. Stepping out into the hallway, Alice carefully folded the glossy ultrasound photo, clutching it like her most prized possession. She stared at the tiny image, trying to imagine what her baby would look like growing up. But as she began walking toward the exit, her mind wandered, and the warm joy in her chest gave way to a familiar ache. Daniel couldn't make it again, she thought, fighting back a wave of resentment. That morning, her husband had promised to do everything possible to get out of work. But then, at the last minute, as always, something came up. "I'm sorry, Allie," he had said, hurriedly buttoning his dress shirt. "We have a massive board meeting. The CEO wants me there personally. I'll hear all about it tonight. You can tell me everything. Okay?" She had nodded, not knowing what to say. She could handle the appointment alone, of course, but that wasn't the point. This was their child, the first ultrasound, the first time they could see their tiny miracle together. She had wanted him there so badly, to feel the exact same awe she felt. But Daniel's corporate job always came first. Now, standing in the hallway, Alice dreaded the thought of going back to the house. Remembering what awaited her, she absent-mindedly rubbed her belly, as if trying to soothe both herself and the baby. Nancy, her overbearing, icy mother-in-law. Her sharp gaze, her constant nitpicking, her uncanny ability to make cutting remarks in a way that made it impossible to talk back. "Alice, you're doing that completely wrong." Her words from the kitchen echoed in Alice's mind. Nancy always seemed to accidentally appear at the worst possible moments. "Don't you know Daniel has high cholesterol? Why are you adding so much butter? Lord, what kind of housewife are you?" Alice often dreamed of a place of their own, where she and her husband could just live as a couple, and soon as a family of 3. It could be a tiny apartment, just as long as it was theirs, free from Nancy and her suffocating control. But every time she brought up moving out, Daniel would just brush it off. "Why would we pay rent or take on a massive mortgage when we can live here for free? You see how big the house is." Big. Yes, but Alice felt like a permanent, unwelcome guest in it. Every move she made was judged, Every word could be used against her, and she knew Nancy would never let him go. In those moments, Alice felt trapped, like a bird in a gilded cage. Alice slowly began walking toward the exit, clutching the ultrasound photo like her most prized possession. Her thoughts kept returning to the same fantasy. How wonderful it would be if they lived independently. A place of their own, even a small, rented one. Her imagination painted a cozy, one-bedroom apartment where no one would interfere. It would be decorated to her taste. She pictured sitting on the couch with Daniel in the evenings, wrapped in a soft blanket, watching movies and holding hands. They would plan for the future, pick out nursery furniture, cook dinner together, all without hearing Nancy's commentary or fearing judgment over some trivial thing. The image was so vivid that Alice felt a faint smile touch her lips. Then, a memory of a past argument surfaced. One evening, she had tried to discuss this with Daniel. "You know, I really think we should start looking for our own place," she had begun carefully, gauging his reaction. "Why? We have everything we need right here," Daniel replied, not even looking up from his smartphone. "What are you missing? We have plenty of bedrooms. It's not cramped. It's not about the number of rooms, Daniel." Alice sighed. "It's just, we're our own family now. We should live separately. It's normal." Daniel just shrugged. "Allie, you know my mom is a widow. She needs help around the house. And besides, there's the cost of rent, utilities, insurance. Why take on extra expenses?" That conversation went nowhere. Daniel seemed entirely blind to how miserable she was living with his mother. Nancy never approved of her son's choice of a wife, and Alice felt it every single day, but she stayed quiet, wanting to keep the peace. Now, with their child growing inside her, those thoughts became impossible to ignore. She knew she couldn't keep living like this. She was responsible for someone else now. How everything would change if we just moved, she thought. Our house would be quiet and safe, no one hovering over us. We would be a real family. She could already see herself setting up a small nursery, hanging curtains, organizing onesies in a neat dresser. Alice stopped in front of a small baby boutique near the clinic exit. Behind the glass were bright cribs and a mobile spinning gently from the ceiling. That's what we need, she thought. The baby deserves a home of its own. The thought of the future gave her strength. She knew it would take some difficult conversations, but for her baby's peace of mind, she was ready to fight. Taking a deep breath, Alice rubbed her belly again. "We'll figure it out, little one," she whispered. "We'll make it work." Still lost in her thoughts, Alice walked down the long, intersecting hallway of the medical complex, making her way to the parking garage. Suddenly, she heard a painfully familiar voice. Her heart stopped for a second, then began hammering wildly. It was Daniel. She stopped and looked around. A few yards away, standing near a different specialist's office, was her husband. He was talking to someone, but Alice couldn't see his face, only his back, a back she knew in intimate detail. Alice's heart swelled with joy. He made it after all. He found the time, canceled his meetings, and wanted to surprise her. A bright, genuine smile broke across her face. Her eyes sparkled. She took a step forward, gripping the ultrasound photo tighter. "I'll show him the baby right now, and we can celebrate together," she thought. "Maybe this will be the push we need to finally talk about our own place." Daniel looked relaxed, even animated. He was telling a story, gesturing actively. There was no trace of the stressed, rushed tone he'd used that morning when talking about the board meeting. He seemed like a completely different person, light, carefree. She stood there, holding the photo with both hands, gathering the courage to call out to him. The words were already forming in her mind. "Daniel, I'm so glad you came. Look, this is our baby." The warmth in her heart completely melted away the morning's resentment, but something held her back from rushing up immediately. She wanted to savor the moment, to just watch her husband standing there in the same building where she had just seen their child. He really wanted to surprise me, Alice thought, the idea filling her with even more happiness. She took another step and opened her mouth to call his name, but froze. Daniel laughed. It was a loud, joyful laugh, the sound of a man who was completely and utterly happy. Alice felt a sudden, inexplicable flutter of anxiety, but she immediately pushed it down. She couldn't imagine anything ruining this day. One more second, and she would call out to him. Her heart was beating louder than ever, but not out of fear, out of the anticipation of sharing their joy. She was just about to say his name when a woman walked up to him. Her confident stride, striking features, and glossy dark hair immediately caught the eye. She was a stunning brunette, wearing a fitted crimson sweater and designer skinny jeans. Olivia. That was the name Alice would learn a few moments later. Before Alice could even process who this woman was, the brunette stepped right up to Daniel and wrapped her arms around his neck. It all happened so fast that Alice couldn't believe her eyes. Olivia leaned in and, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, kissed Daniel fully on the lips. A smudge of red lipstick remained on his mouth. Daniel didn't pull away. On the contrary, he smiled and casually pulled the woman closer by her waist. In that single second, Alice's entire world began to collapse. She stood rooted to the spot, unable to move or look away. Her feet felt glued to the linoleum floor. For a fleeting moment, she hoped it was a mistake. A bizarre prank, an optical illusion. "Honey, we're about to see our baby," Olivia said in a ringing, excited voice, looking deeply into Daniel's eyes. "I'm so nervous. What do you want more? A boy? Or a girl?" Daniel's smile widened, and he leaned in, whispering something in Olivia's ear. Alice couldn't hear what he said, but she didn't need to. His answer made the brunette throw her head back in a loud, melodic laugh. Alice's heart shattered. She couldn't tear her eyes away from the scene. Her hands went numb, and the ultrasound photo nearly slipped from her fingers. The thoughts in her head scrambled, as if someone had abruptly erased her reality, leaving only a dark, gaping void. Her husband. Her Daniel, who kissed her every morning and told her he was going to the office, was holding another woman, and now it turned out this woman was pregnant too. Indignation boiled within her. She felt an icy chill spread through her veins, while a crushing weight settled on her chest. How could he? How? The question pounded in her brain like a drumbeat. But the pain was even sharper when she realized that Daniel was clearly far more invested in Olivia's pregnancy than in their own child. Olivia kept talking, practically glowing. "Can you imagine? I can already picture how much he or she will look like you. You know, I'm just so happy you're always by my side." Daniel nodded. His eyes locked on Olivia. That look full of pure, unadulterated tenderness was the final blow. Alice couldn't stand there and watch anymore. Pain, betrayal, and fury twisted into a violent storm inside her. She felt like she was going to suffocate if she didn't let it out. Crushing the glossy ultrasound photo in her fist, Alice took a few steps forward. She wasn't going to stay silent. She walked closer, her heart hammering so hard it felt like the sound was echoing down the corridor. With every step, the world around her seemed to grow quieter, until only one word remained. "Daniel," she said. Her voice was quiet but steady, even though everything inside her was violently shaking. He flinched. He spun around instantly, while Olivia froze, her gaze darting confusedly between Alice and Daniel. "Alice," he stammered, completely bewildered. The color drained from his face, and his hand, which had just been resting intimately on Olivia's waist, dropped limply to his side. What? What are you doing here?" "I had a doctor's appointment, remember?" Alice replied coldly, clutching the crumpled ultrasound photo. "But I see you had a much more important meeting with the CEO." She paused, summoning every ounce of strength not to break down sobbing right there in front of them. Then, narrowing her eyes, she asked the question that had just destroyed her life. "So, what do you want more, Daniel? A boy or a girl?" Daniel shifted his weight, panicking. His eyes darted frantically between his wife and his mistress. Olivia, meanwhile, immediately crossed her arms, adopting a defensive posture. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and a flash of contempt appeared in her eyes. "Listen, Allie, it's not what you think," he started, but the cliché words sounded pitifully unconvincing. "Not what I think?" A bitter, sarcastic edge crept into Alice's voice as her hands began to tremble. "So, you just brought her here for an ultrasound by accident? You're just casually discussing your baby? What about our baby, Daniel?" "Our baby?" Olivia repeated, letting out a short, cynical scoff. "Oh, so you're the wife." Those words, delivered with such mockery, felt like a physical slap to Alice's face. She couldn't endure this farce for another second. Tears welled up, blurring her vision, and she took a step backward. "You know what?" she said, her voice cracking as she looked from Daniel to Olivia. "You two deserve each other." Without waiting for a response, Alice turned on her heel and practically ran down the hall. Tears streamed freely down her face, the polished floors and bright fluorescent lights blurring together. "Allie, wait!" he yelled after her, but there was no sincerity in his voice, no desperate chase to stop her. Bursting through the heavy glass doors into the warm afternoon air, she stopped to take a breath, but it didn't help. Her heart was racing, and the same agonizing questions looped in her mind. How could he do this? How could I be so blind? What am I going to do now? Alice walked blindly down the sidewalk, occasionally bumping into pedestrians. The tears wouldn't stop, and a bitter lump of pure betrayal lodged in her throat. She had nowhere to go. She absolutely could not go back to Nancy's sprawling, oppressive McMansion. Returning to a house where she was already treated like a nuisance, knowing now that her entire marriage was a lie, was unthinkable. Finding a secluded spot in a small neighborhood park, she collapsed onto a wooden bench. Here, hidden by the oak trees, she felt slightly less exposed. Alice buried her face in her hands, and the sobs she had been fighting back finally tore through her. When the tears finally stopped, Alice sat up, gripping her phone tightly. She had no tears left, but she needed a plan. Returning to the house was out of the question. "I need to find a place. Anything. Just for now," she thought, opening up Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace to search for local rooms to rent. She scrolled for a long time, dismissing the expensive apartments and shady listings. Finally, a modest ad caught her eye. Room for rent in historic home. Very low cost in exchange for light housekeeping and grocery runs. It seemed almost too good to be true, given the notoriously high rent in the area, but she was out of options. Alice dialed the number. "Hello? I'm calling about the room," she started hesitantly. "Yes, it's still available. Come take a look," an older, raspy but pleasant female voice replied. "Let me give you the address." Alice took an Uber to the location that same afternoon. The house was an older, slightly run-down craftsman-style home in the suburbs, with a sagging porch and an overgrown front garden. Standing on the porch was a short, elderly woman in a floral blouse, leaning heavily on a cane. Her face was deeply lined, but her eyes exuded warmth and kindness. "Are you Alice?" the woman asked, looking at her intently. "Yes," Alice nodded. "Are you Eleanor?" "That's me. Come on in, sweetheart. Let's see if our humble abode suits you," the woman smiled, opening the screen door. The room was small but incredibly cozy. It had a simple twin bed, a nightstand, and an antique oak wardrobe, everything she needed. Potted geraniums sat on the windowsill, overlooking the wild garden. For the first time all day, Alice felt the tight knot in her chest loosen slightly. "How much are you asking for rent?" Alice asked cautiously. Eleanor waved her hand dismissively. "I won't take your money. Just help me around the house, and we'll call it even. As you can see, my bad hip makes it hard to keep up with the chores." Alice was stunned by her generosity. She agreed without a second thought. Later, over a pot of Earl Grey tea, Eleanor shared her story. 2 years ago, her grandson, Max, had been sent to prison for aggravated assault. He had defended a young woman who was being harassed outside a bar, but one of the attackers turned out to be the son of a prominent local politician. The trial had been a sham, the self-defense claim ignored, and Eleanor was left entirely alone after suffering a mild stroke. "But it's all right," Eleanor said, her voice turning firm. "Max will be out soon. I'll wait for him. Until then, you live here, Alice. Help me out, and we'll get by together." Alice felt that she had finally found a safe harbor, even if it was temporary. Life with Eleanor was peaceful, but Alice knew that just covering her rent wouldn't be enough. She needed money for food, prenatal care, and baby supplies. She started looking for part-time work, but heavily pregnant and under immense stress, finding traditional employment was nearly impossible. One morning, while they were having breakfast, Eleanor made a suggestion. "Alice, honey, I was talking to a neighbor. Her elderly aunt needs some looking after. Would you want to give it a try? She's a good soul. If a bit grumpy, and she pays in cash." It's not a fortune, but it's steady. Alice thought about it. She had no other options, so she agreed. That was how her work as an in-home caregiver began. Her first client was Mary, a frail widow who was practically housebound. She lived in a cramped apartment overflowing with dusty photo albums and faded greeting cards. Her life was defined by silence. Her only companions, the thriller novels she read. "Alice, thank you for coming," Mary said one afternoon, looking at the young woman with gratitude. "You know, I don't really have anyone left. My son died in a car crash 20 years ago, and the neighbors only talk to me when I'm in their way at the mailbox." Alice went there a few times a week. She helped clean, went grocery shopping, and, most importantly, simply sat with her. Alice understood that Mary didn't just need a maid, she needed a human connection. Another client was Annie, the complete opposite of Mary. This elderly woman was energetic, boisterous, and loved a good laugh, but she suffered from the same deep loneliness. Her only daughter had married a European executive and moved to France, completely cutting ties with her mother. "I'm totally alone," Annie would sigh, adjusting her bright silk scarf. "But I refuse to be bored." Alice helped her cook and do laundry, and in return, listened to endless, hilarious stories from Annie's youth. Annie became a source of encouragement. "Don't give up, sweetheart. Life throws curveballs," Annie told her one day. "I look at you and see a strong woman. You're going to be just fine." The work was physically tiring, but it brought Alice a deep sense of fulfillment. Every evening, she returned to Eleanor's house feeling like she was doing something that truly mattered. In the eyes of these women, she saw gratitude, and she knew she was more than just hired help to them. Amidst everything, the thought of divorcing Daniel gave her no peace. She knew she had to legally protect herself and her unborn child, but she had no idea where to begin. Every night, lying in the small bed at Eleanor's, her mind raced with plans. The first step was finding a lawyer to initiate the divorce and fight for child support. One morning, scrolling through online directories, Alice found an ad for a local law firm. Experienced attorneys. Family law and divorce. Affordable rates. Without overthinking it, she booked a consultation. The lawyer's office was located in a depressing strip mall next to a dry cleaner. She walked in and found herself in a cramped room with cheap waiting chairs and a desk buried under manila folders. Behind it sat a middle-aged man in a slightly rumpled suit. He looked exhausted, but offered a practiced smile as she walked in. "Hello, you must be Alice. I'm Arthur Vance," he introduced himself, gesturing for her to sit. She sat down, trying to project confidence, but her hands were trembling. She told Arthur her story. He listened, occasionally nodding and jotting notes on a legal pad. "Your case isn't exactly straightforward," he said, leaning back in his squeaky chair. "Your husband comes from a wealthy family, if I'm understanding correctly, and his mother is well-connected." Alice nodded. "Then prepare yourself for a fight. Cases like this are rarely resolved quickly or cleanly." "I don't want to take everything from him," Alice said quietly. "I just need a legal divorce, fair child support, and enough to ensure my baby has a safe life." Arthur pursed his lips, looking thoughtful. "It's possible, but I'll need to draft the filings, gather financial evidence, file for discovery. It takes time." He paused, looking at her hesitantly. "And, of course, I require a retainer fee up front to begin work." "How much?" Alice asked, her shoulders tensing. The figure Arthur named was astronomical to her current budget. She sat silently, staring at the number he had scribbled on a piece of paper, feeling a wave of utter despair crash over her. When she returned home, she was unusually quiet. Eleanor noticed her gloomy mood immediately. "What happened, Allie?" she asked gently. "The lawyer needs a huge retainer, and I don't have that kind of money," the girl admitted, nervously twisting the hem of her shirt. Eleanor thought for a moment, stood up, walked to her bedroom, and returned a few minutes later with a small, heavy envelope. "Here," she said, placing it on the table in front of Alice. "This is my rainy day fund. I've been saving it for Max, so he can have a fresh start when he gets out, but you need it more right now." Alice stared at the envelope in shock. Inside was a thick stack of $100 bills. "I can't take this," she stammered. "You can. And you will," Eleanor replied firmly. "Max would understand. You can pay me back whenever you get back on your feet." Tears spilled over Alice's eyelashes. "Thank you," I promise I will repay every cent." With that money, she went back to Arthur Vance and signed the retainer agreement. A new chapter in her fight had begun. Several weeks passed since Alice hired Arthur Vance. She eagerly awaited progress, but all she got were infrequent, brief phone calls filled with legal jargon, explaining why the process was moving at a glacial pace. Every time her phone buzzed, Alice's heart jumped with hope, only to be let down. "Hello, Alice." Arthur's voice was always monotone, entirely lacking urgency. "I just wanted to touch base. Things aren't going as smoothly as we'd hoped." "What do you mean?" she asked, her guard going up as she sat at Eleanor's kitchen table, clutching a mug of tea. "Well," he dragged out the word, seemingly searching for excuses. "Until the baby is born, your chances of securing preliminary spousal or child support are very slim. Family courts usually prefer to wait. Furthermore, if your husband contests paternity and refuses a DNA test, it complicates the filings immensely." Alice felt a cold knot in her stomach. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but her lawyer sounded utterly defeated, almost as if he were trying to talk her out of it. "You told me this case would be tough, but doable," she reminded him. "There has to be a legal precedent or a way to compel a paternity test." Arthur cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Let me just keep working on the discovery phase. We need to prepare for the first hearing, whenever the judge puts us on the docket. But be aware, it could take a very long time." The call ended, leaving Alice deeply unsettled. She looked over at Eleanor, who was standing by the stove, watching her closely. "Nothing again?" the old woman asked with a heavy sigh. "He says we can't really do anything until the baby is born," Alice replied softly, dropping her head. "That's mighty strange." Eleanor frowned. "Didn't he know that from the beginning? He's supposed to be the expert." Eleanor's words hit home. Why hadn't Arthur mentioned this massive hurdle during their initial consultation? Why did he eagerly take the retainer if he knew his hands were tied? She remembered how confident he had sounded at first, giving her hope. Now, he seemed to invent new excuses to delay every week. As the days went by, her anxiety skyrocketed. Arthur rarely answered her emails. When he did call, it felt like he was stalling. His answers were vague, dodging any specific questions about financial subpoenas. "Something isn't right with this Arthur guy," Alice confessed to Eleanor after yet another useless phone call. "I don't even know if he's actually doing anything, or if he just doesn't care." "You know, there are scammers out there," Eleanor noted, shaking her head. "They take the retainer, do the bare minimum, and leave you high and dry." That thought terrified Alice. She realized her desperation and lack of legal knowledge had made her an easy target. She couldn't just blindly trust him anymore. She needed to find out if Arthur was actually fighting for her, or if he had just conned her out of Eleanor's savings. It was a perfectly normal morning. Alice was helping Eleanor in the kitchen, washing dishes after breakfast, when a sudden, heavy knock echoed from the front door. Eleanor froze, glancing at the door, then looked at Alice with wide, anxious eyes. "Who could that be?" she whispered. "I'll go check," Alice said, wiping her hands and heading for the hallway. She opened the door cautiously, expecting a delivery driver, or maybe a neighbor. Instead, a tall, broad-shouldered young man with closely cropped dark hair stood on the porch. He looked pale, but his jaw was set, and his gray, tired eyes scanned the room. "Grandma?" he said softly. "Max." Eleanor gasped, instantly forgetting her cane. She rushed to the door as fast as her aching joints allowed. The young man stepped inside and enveloped his grandmother in a tight embrace. Eleanor openly wept, burying her face in his chest, unable to believe he was really standing there. "My boy. You're home," she kept repeating. "I waited so long." "It's okay, Grandma. I'm here." "I'm home," Max said, gently rubbing her back. When the tears finally subsided, Eleanor introduced them. "Max, this is Alice. She's been renting a room and helping me out." "Alice, this is my grandson, Max." Max looked at the young woman and offered a small, polite smile, but his eyes were sharp and observant, sizing her up. "Nice to meet you," he said in a deep voice. "Thank you for looking out for my grandma. It's nice to meet you too," Alice replied, suddenly feeling a bit shy in his imposing presence. Over the next few days, Max settled back into civilian life. He was a quiet, reserved guy, but inherently kind. During dinners, Eleanor would fuss over him, asking a million questions. But Max usually gave short answers, clearly wanting to leave his prison memories behind. Slowly, Alice noticed Max paying attention to her routine. He started asking about her day, quietly taking over the heavier chores, carrying groceries, fixing the broken porch railing, taking out the trash. His silent, reliable support was a shock to Alice, who was so used to Daniel's utter indifference. "You shouldn't be lifting that," he told her one evening when they were alone in the kitchen, gently taking a heavy cast-iron pan from her hands. "I'm going through a really rough patch right now," Alice admitted, staring at the floor. "If you need anything, just say the word. I've got your back," Max said with absolute sincerity. A wave of warmth rushed through Alice. For the first time in a very long time, a man was offering her help without demanding anything in return. She realized she could trust him. Eleanor watched them interact with a secret smile. She loved seeing Max channel his protective nature into helping the newest member of their household. Alice's doubts about her lawyer finally reached a boiling point. She decided to visit Arthur Vance in person. The endless delays and confusing excuses had convinced her something was deeply wrong. She drove to the strip mall, her stomach tied in knots. "I'll just ask for a direct status update on the filings," she told herself, trying to stave off panic. When she approached the frosted glass door of the office, she noticed it was slightly ajar. She raised her hand to knock but froze. From inside the office, she heard Arthur's voice and another, chillingly familiar voice. The cold, aristocratic tone of her mother-in-law, Nancy. "Everything is going exactly to plan," Arthur was saying, sounding surprisingly confident. "I've been managing her expectations. She has no idea she's going to lose everything." Alice stopped breathing. Her blood ran cold. "Good," Nancy replied. "Make absolutely sure she gets nothing. No alimony, no division of assets. You know very well I will not tolerate that little gold digger taking a dime of my family's money." "Don't worry," Arthur assured her smoothly. "It'll be handled exactly as you requested." The words hit Alice like a freight train. She couldn't believe it. She always knew Nancy was ruthless and wanted her gone, but to actually track down and bribe her own lawyer? It was pure evil. Fury replaced her shock. Unable to listen to another word, Alice shoved the door open and marched into the office. Both of them froze. Arthur turned ghostly pale, scrambling up from his desk chair. Nancy simply slowly raised a manicured eyebrow, radiating her trademark arrogance. "Alice!" Arthur practically squeaked, entirely losing his professional composure. "What? What are you doing here?" "I heard everything," Alice said, her voice shaking with rage, but her posture straight. "You're jumping to conclusions, little girl," Nancy said, her tone dripping with ice. "You misunderstood. Arthur is simply doing his job within the confines of the law." "The law?" Alice laughed bitterly. "You paid off my attorney to sabotage my divorce and leave my baby with nothing. You call that the law?" Nancy didn't bother replying. She just looked at Arthur, clearly expecting him to clean up the mess. "Alice, please, let's not make a scene," Arthur stammered, sweating profusely. "This is a massive misunderstanding. I am terminating my representation," Alice stated firmly, looking him dead in the eye. "You are no longer my lawyer, and I will be reporting you to the State Bar Association." She turned and walked out of the office, slamming the door behind her. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely unlock her car. Her mind was racing. How could she have been so stupid? Why did she trust someone who turned out to be a bought and paid-for traitor? But underneath the betrayal, something new was forming a spine of steel. Alice swore she would never let them use her as a doormat again. She would find a way to protect herself and her baby, no matter what it took. The next morning at Eleanor's house started normally. Alice was getting ready to head to the grocery store, while Max was in the front yard, trying to fix the squeaky gate latch. Suddenly, a sleek, black luxury sedan pulled up to the curb. A tall, distinguished-looking man with silver hair and a sharp suit stepped out. He looked around the property, as if verifying the address. Who could that be? Alice wondered from the window. Max put down his wrench and walked toward the gate. At that moment, Eleanor stepped onto the porch and gasped. "Victor Anderson?" Her voice wavered. "Hello, Eleanor," the man said warmly, taking off his sunglasses. "It's been a long time." "I can't believe it," the old woman smiled, tears springing to her eyes. It turned out that Victor Anderson was the father of the young woman Max had saved 2 years ago. A high-level corporate executive, he had been stationed in Tokyo during the incident and the trial. He had only recently returned to the States and learned the full truth of what Max had sacrificed for his daughter. He had immediately tracked Max down to thank him personally. "Max, thank you," Victor said, shaking the young man's hand with immense respect. "If it weren't for you, I don't know what would have happened to my little girl. I just did what anyone should have done," Max replied, looking slightly uncomfortable with the praise. Later, over coffee in the living room, the conversation turned to Alice. Victor, noticing the heavy exhaustion in her eyes, gently asked what she was going through. Max, with Alice's permission, explained her nightmare: the cheating husband, the wealthy, vicious mother-in-law, and the corrupt lawyer. Victor listened in silence, his expression hardening. "I can help with this," he said decisively. "I have a close friend who is one of the most ruthless, effective family law attorneys in the city. I guarantee he will tear them apart." Alice looked at him in shock. It was hard to believe this incredibly wealthy stranger was offering such massive support. The very next morning, Victor called his friend, Stephen Carter, a lawyer with a flawless reputation and a terrifying courtroom presence. The conversation was brief, but urgent. "Stephen, it's Victor. I need a massive favor. I have a young woman here who needs immediate, aggressive legal protection. When can we see you?" "Bring her to my office tomorrow at 11 a.m., Stephen replied instantly. Victor personally drove Alice to downtown the next day. The law firm was worlds apart from Arthur Vance's dingy strip mall setup. It occupied the top floor of a glass skyscraper, with sleek modern art and sweeping views of the city skyline. Alice felt entirely out of place, terrified that a high-powered lawyer like Stephen Carter would view her case as petty or a waste of his time. But her fears vanished the moment Stephen stepped out of his office. He was a sharp-eyed man in his late 40s, exuding authority. "Alice, come on in," he said, shaking her hand firmly. She sat in the plush leather chair and told him everything. Stephen didn't interrupt, just listened intently, occasionally asking a highly specific, tactical question. His focus was absolute, and for the first time, Alice felt she was in the hands of a true professional. "What you've described," Stephen said coldly when she finished, "is beyond unethical. It's criminal. I promise you, Alice, we are going to scorch the earth to protect you and your baby." Those words breathed life back into her. Stephen Carter was a man who went to war and won. He immediately swung into action. He instructed Alice to gather any bank statements, texts, and emails she still had access to. He assured her he would personally oversee the discovery process. "We're not just going to prove his infidelity and establish paternity," Stephen told her. "We are going to make him pay out the nose. He will not escape his legal obligations." Alice returned to Eleanor's house feeling completely reborn. She told Max and Eleanor everything. "He's a shark," Max said, smiling. "If you need me to testify about anything, I'm there. You're going to win this." Alice realized she was ready for the fight. The legal battle would be brutal, but she wasn't alone anymore. She had an army behind her. The divorce trial was an absolute media circus. Because Nancy owned a chain of lucrative private medical clinics, and Daniel was a minor local socialite, the courtroom was packed with journalists and local gossips. The family's reputation was on the line, and Nancy decided the best defense was a vicious offense. She instructed her high-priced legal team to paint Alice as a manipulative gold digger. Taking the stand, Nancy looked down her nose at the courtroom. "Your Honor, I must point out that Alice has a highly questionable background. Even before the marriage, her behavior was erratic, and her desperate push to marry my son was clearly a calculated move to gain access to our family's trust funds." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Alice squeezed her hands together under the table, but Stephen Carter didn't even blink. He calmly waited for Nancy to finish before standing up. "Your Honor," Stephen's voice boomed across the room. "My client is a hard-working woman who poured everything into her marriage. The statements made by the respondent's mother are nothing more than a desperate smokescreen to distract this court from the facts." Stephen moved with surgical precision. He submitted bank records proving Alice had deposited her entire salary into their joint account to pay for their living expenses, while Daniel secretly wired thousands of dollars to an account in Olivia's name. He called character witnesses who testified to Alice's dedication and Daniel's constant absence. Then came the kill shot. Stephen submitted an audio recording and email trails provided by a whistleblower at Arthur Vance's firm, definitively proving that Nancy had paid a $20,000 bribe to Alice's former attorney to throw the case. The courtroom erupted in gasps. The judge slammed his gavel. Nancy's arrogant facade completely crumbled. She went pale, realizing she had just perjured herself and was facing potential criminal charges. "There is your truth, Your Honor," Stephen said, his voice dripping with disdain. This family committed fraud, bribery, and financial abuse to avoid their legal duty to an unborn child. Furthermore, Stephen presented the court-mandated DNA test that Daniel had vindictively demanded in a desperate attempt to delay the case and deny child support. It proved, with 99.9% certainty, that Daniel was the father of Alice's baby, cementing his financial obligations once and for all. The judge was furious. The ruling was swift and devastating. Daniel was ordered to pay maximum child support and substantial alimony to ensure Alice and the baby's standard of living. Alice was also awarded half of all marital assets, including the equity from Daniel's investments. After the gavel fell, Stephen turned to Alice with a warm smile. "I told you justice would be served. You earned this." Alice openly wept. But this time, they were tears of profound relief. Max and Eleanor, who had sat right behind her in the gallery, pulled her into a massive hug. The fallout was spectacular. Nancy's reputation in the city was incinerated. The local elite, who once kissed the ground she walked on, shunned her for the bribery scandal. Facing investigations and losing all her wealthy clients, she was forced to sell her medical clinics at a loss and flee to another state, disappearing into disgraced obscurity. Daniel's life fared no better. Olivia, realizing Daniel's trust fund was heavily depleted and his reputation ruined, dumped him the very next week, callously revealing that her own pregnancy had been nothing more than a false alarm or perhaps a calculated lie to trap him. Alone, broke, and humiliated, he spiraled into heavy alcoholism, spending his days in empty bars. Alice, however, felt her life had finally begun. She had financial security and, more importantly, peace of mind to focus on her baby. Max remained her rock, supporting her through the final months of her pregnancy. 2 months after the trial, Alice gave birth to a healthy, beautiful baby girl named Lily. Max was right there in the delivery room, holding her hand while Daniel was nowhere to be found. For the first time, she felt truly loved and part of a real family. A few years passed. Alice's life, once a nightmare of betrayal, had blossomed into something beautiful. Victor Anderson, who had become a surrogate father figure to both Alice and Max, pitched an idea that changed everything. "You both have such a gift for taking care of people," Victor said one evening over dinner at Eleanor's. "Why don't we turn that into a real business? Let's open an assisted living facility. I'll provide the capital." Alice and Max were thrilled. They threw themselves into planning a boutique senior care home, a place where the elderly wouldn't be forgotten, but treated like family. They bought a sprawling, beautiful property in a quiet, leafy suburb. The building was renovated to include bright, spacious rooms, cozy communal lounges with fireplaces, and a gorgeous garden with walking paths. Alice used all her experience caring for Mary, Annie, and Eleanor to design the daily routines, ensuring top-tier medical care combined with genuine emotional support. Max managed the operations, maintenance, and logistics, running the facility flawlessly. From the day they cut the ribbon, the home was filled with warmth. The residents came from all walks of life, carrying different stories, but sharing a common desire for connection. Alice and Max didn't just run a business. They sat with the residents, listened to their histories, and organized movie nights and family-style dinners. During a visit, Victor looked around the bustling, happy dining room. "You aren't just housing these people. You're giving them their dignity back. You've given them a second family." Alice smiled, leaning her head on Max's shoulder. "We know what it's like to feel totally alone. We just built the place we wish we had." Over those years of building a business together, Alice and Max's bond deepened into a profound, unbreakable love. They had survived their darkest days together and built an empire of kindness. One summer evening, under the fairy lights in the garden of their facility, Max got down on one knee. He didn't make a grand, flashy speech. He simply held her hand, his eyes shining with devotion. "You and Lily are my whole world, Allie. I want to be your family. Forever. Will you marry me? Yes, she answered instantly. Tears of joy in her eyes. 1,000,000 times, yes. Their wedding was a small, intimate garden ceremony. Eleanor sat in the front row, wiping her eyes with a lace handkerchief, next to Victor and a few close friends. Alice finally felt she was exactly where she was meant to be, anchored by a man who cherished her. A year later, they welcomed a baby boy. They named him Alex, in honor of Max's late brother. Alex became the light of their lives. Alice and Max shared the parenting equally, waking up to the sound of laughter rather than the sting of criticism. Fate had rewarded Alice and Max for their resilience and pure hearts. They had built a life on a foundation of mutual respect and compassion, proving that goodness eventually yields incredible dividends. Meanwhile, Nancy's toxic empire had crumbled to dust, leaving her utterly alone in her bitterness. Daniel remained trapped in a prison of his own making, a footnote in a life he threw away for a fleeting affair. Looking back on her journey, Alice saw the brutal trials as necessary lessons. She learned that even the most devastating betrayal could be the catalyst for a beautiful new beginning. Life punishes those who step on others and rewards those who fight with integrity. Standing on the porch of their bustling, happy home, holding her son while Max wrapped an arm around her waist, Alice knew she had won. Her road had been agonizing, but it had led her to a life of pure, unshakable happiness.